Rax Tiberian had a lot of regrets. Not taking up that cushy desk job back on Earth was one. Signing up for the Intrepid, a bucket of bolts held together by equal parts duct tape and misplaced optimism, was another. But his current predicament took the cake. Not just any cake, mind you, but a full-blown wedding cake of poor decisions. "Rax, you might want to see this," called out Midge, his second-in-command and unofficial specialist in bad news delivery. She had the perpetual look of someone who just found out their dog had eaten their tax return. Rax ran a hand through his hair, which at this point was more static electricity than style, and trudged over to the holoscreen. "What is it?" "Missed another birthday holo from my mother threatening to disown me if I don't quit." Midge smirked, which was her way of showing deep concern. "Nah, worse. Seems like the rebels have decided recorded knowledge is overrated. They're planning to torch the Universal Archive." Rax blinked. "That's a bad joke, right?" "Because if it's not, I'm gonna need a bigger drink." "No joke," Midge replied, showing him the intercepted transmission. "Apparently, the rebels think the archive's been corrupted by the Galactic Council's propaganda." Rax had a momentary vision of 1,000 librarians weeping and clutching their cardigans as their life's work went up in flames. "Great. So we're stuck in the middle of a galactic book-burning party." "Pretty much," Midge confirmed. "And unless we want to end up as cosmic roadkill, we better pick a side." Here was the rub. Humanity had clawed its way into a position as the galaxy's Switzerland, neutral, smug, and surprisingly hard to conquer. But now, neutrality was as useful as a chocolate spacesuit. "What's Captain Boringface over at the Council saying about this?" Rax asked. "Officially, denial. Unofficially, they're shitting themselves," Midge said, ever the diplomat. The Intrepid's bridge was a cramped affair, packed with consoles that hummed like they were contemplating retirement, and crew that, for the most part, looked just as enthused. There was Deet, the ship's engineer who believed duct tape truly could fix anything, and Core, their gunner, a man with the disposition of a bear with a thorn in its paw and about as much patience. "Core, how are our weapons?" Rax asked, hoping against hope. Core snorted, which from him was practically a serenade. "We've got 2 working turrets and a missile launcher that's more inclined to explode on us than the target," Rax sighed. "Wonderful. And here I was worried things might be too easy." Midge leaned in closer. "There's a possibility we could pull this off. If we intercept the rebels before they reach the archive, we might stop them. Or we could end up as a footnote in a history book no one's around to write," Rax countered, ever the optimist. Still, he knew they didn't really have a choice. Rax was many things: jaded, scruffy, a borderline caffeine addict. But he wasn't about to let the rebels erase knowledge, even if most of it was bureaucratic nonsense. "Okay, let's go be the galaxy's unpaid librarians," Rax said, clapping his hands together. "Deet, get the engines whining. Core, see if you can sweet-talk that missile launcher into not killing us." As the crew sprang into action, Rax took a moment to reflect on the absurdity of it all. If someone had told him he'd be saving the universe's great bastion of knowledge, he would have laughed until he cried. But here he was, about to hurl his rickety ship into the furnace of a galactic rebellion. "You realize we're about to become the most hated people this side of the Andromeda," Midge said, sidling up next to him with a wry grin. "Add it to my list of accomplishments," Rax replied, trying for bravado but landing somewhere closer to resigned exasperation. The Intrepid lurched into motion, the engines protesting loudly but ultimately relenting. Rax was always amazed they even worked, given the age and condition of the ship, but Deet had a way with machines that bordered on the magical. "Course set," Deet announced, fingers flying across the console with a grace that belied the general chaos of their operation. The ship entered hyperspace with all the grace of a drunk stumbling into a bar fight. Rax could almost hear the universe complaining about the noise. They had scant hours before they'd reach the archive. Time enough for Rax to contemplate the many ways they could die. Exploding in space, being shot down by rebels, or, his personal favorite, getting caught in a bureaucratic quagmire of the Council's making. Kor was busy tinkering with the missile launcher, muttering obscenities under his breath like they were a prayer. "If this thing decides to blow, at least we'll go out with a bang," he said, not looking up. "Comforting," Rax replied dryly. "I always wanted an explosive career." Midge was busy monitoring communications, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We're not alone out here," she said finally. "Scans show 2 rebel ships on intercept course." "Fantastic," Rax muttered. "And here I was worried it might be a quiet evening." The crew prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The rebels were unlikely to chat over tea and biscuits about their master plan. No, they'd be more the shooting first, asking questions when everyone was dead type. "Weapons online," Kor reported, his voice as calm as ever. By which Rax meant it was laced with the kind of rage you'd expect from someone whose last sandwich was stolen out of the shared fridge. Rax toggled the comms, preparing his best diplomatic voice, which was mostly just his regular voice but with fewer swears. "Rebel ships, this is Captain Rax Tiberian of the human ship Intrepid. You're about to do something monumentally stupid by attacking the Universal Archive. How about we skip the shooting and talk this out?" Static greeted him, which he took as a bad sign. "They're charging weapons," Midge said, with the world-weary air of someone reporting the weather. The Intrepid shook as the first shots were fired. Rax could practically feel the universe rolling its eyes at him. "Return fire," Rax ordered, feeling a bit like a man trained to fend off a bear with a very pointy stick. Kor obliged, the ship rattling as their own weapons fired back. "Direct hit," he announced, sounding far too pleased for Rax's comfort. They danced through the stars, the Intrepid dodging fire with all the dexterity of a drunken dancer at a wedding. Rax held onto his seat for dear life, trying not to think about the odds of survival. "Hull integrity at 60%, Deet reported, which in their world was a glowing recommendation. The rebel ships were persistent, refusing to let up. Rax knew they were running out of time, options, and frankly, luck. "Kor, any ideas?" Rax asked, more out of habit than hope. "Yeah, let's not die," Kor replied, still firing at anything that moved. "Inspirational," Rax deadpanned as the ship bucked again. Midge glanced at him, her expression a mix of determination and boredom. "We can break away, use the anomaly field in Sector 8-13 to lose them." Rax considered it. Anomaly fields were unpredictable, like space's version of roulette, but it could work. "Do it," he ordered. "Deet, take us into the field. Let's see if we can lose them." The ship veered off, heading for the anomaly field, which glowed ominously on their screens. Rax hoped it was more like a friendly glow and less like a "we're about to die" glow. The rebels followed, predictably. Rax watched as the anomalies began to mess with their sensors, distorting space around them. "Hold on," Deet warned as they entered the field. The ship lurched violently like it was drunk on its own turmoil. Rax held his breath, praying for a miracle or at least a minor act of God. The rebel ships began to falter, their own systems struggling with the anomalies. Rax grinned, a rare moment of triumph in an otherwise dismal day. "We're losing them," Midge reported, a hint of relief in her voice. The Intrepid broke free of the field, emerging into the open space on the other side. The rebel ships were nowhere to be seen. "We made it," Deet exclaimed, sounding as surprised as anyone. Rax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "Good work, everyone, but let's not celebrate just yet. We still have an archive to save." They set course again, pushing the ship to its limits. Rax settled back in his chair, staring at the stars outside. "Ever feel like we're the universe's favorite chew toy?" he asked Midge, who was now smiling. "All the time," she replied, "but at least we're entertaining." Rax chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, let's give them a show they won't forget." Rax Tiberian planted himself in the captain's chair, grimacing as the Intrepid's engines coughed to life. The ship lurched slightly as if to say, "Are you sure about this?" He patted the armrest like one might comfort a nervous cat. "Stay with me, old girl. We're about to dive headfirst into a hornet's nest of galactic diplomacy at its dumbest. Only instead of honey, "We're after a pile of dusty books," Midge quipped from her station, fingers dancing across her holoscreen like a pianist on speed. "Feels more like we're the flies waiting to be swatted," Rax muttered, watching the stars blur past as they sped toward the Universal Archive, or what was left of it, at any rate. As they neared the site, the first warning came in the form of a debris field scattered around the archive like confetti after a particularly rowdy New Year's party. Chunks of ships, twisted metal, and the occasional floating body told the story of a battle that had clearly taken a turn for the disastrous. "Wow, someone's been busy," Deet commented, chewing on the end of a pen he'd probably confiscated from Rax's desk. "Yeah, if by busy you mean utterly incompetent," Midge replied. "Looks like the rebels and the loyalists decided to have a pissing contest. Spoiler, everyone lost. Doesn't surprise me," Rax said with a sigh, eyeing the mess on the holoscreen. "This whole war's like watching two drunks fighting over a piece of stale bread. Except in this case, the bread is the entire galaxy's accumulated knowledge, and the drunks have lasers," Midge pointed out, her smirk firmly in place. Rax activated the ship's external scanners, the display lighting up with an array of ships, each more battered than the last. The Loyalist ships looked like they'd been cobbled together from spare parts and wishful thinking, while the rebels had apparently gone for a quantity over quality approach. "We've got company," Midge warned, pointing at two blips on the screen, barreling toward them with all the subtlety of a freight train. "Loyalist patrol, looks like they want to chat. Great. My favorite time of the day, small talk with trigger-happy fanatics," Rax said, rolling his eyes. He opened a channel, putting on his best pleasantly disinterested voice. "Loyalist ships, this is Captain Rax Tiberian of the Intrepid. What's left of the archive looks lovely from here, but we're not really in the mood for a house tour. Can we skip to the part where you don't shoot us?" Silence hung in the air for a moment, the kind of silence that usually preceded either a shot across the bow or an awkward apology. Rax crossed his fingers for the latter. "This is Lieutenant Voss of the Loyalist Fleet," a voice crackled over the comms, more static than substance. "State your intentions, or we'll be forced to engage." "Engage with what?" Midge muttered under her breath. "Sticks and stones. We're here to prevent any further damage to the archive," Rax replied, omitting the fact their plan was mostly wing it and hope for the best. "How about we work together and avoid turning this scrap heap into an even bigger pile of junk?" "Very noble of you," Voss replied, tone dripping with sarcasm. "But why should we trust you? For all we know, you're just another group of opportunists looking to exploit this chaos." Rax couldn't blame him for being suspicious. Trust was about as common as a sober sailor at port, and twice as hard to find. "Look, Lieutenant, we just want to make sure there's something left for future generations to bicker about. How about we don't make this any uglier than it already is?" There was a long pause, the kind that suggested Voss was either considering Rax's offer or deciding which torpedo button to press first. The latter seemed more probable given their current luck. "Fine," Voss finally said, though it sounded like the word had been dragged out of him with pliers. "But don't make us regret this." Rax ended the transmission, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well, that went swimmingly." "For a given definition of swimmingly," Midge retorted. "If swimmingly means not being blown to pieces just yet." Details, Rax waved off, though he knew they were skating on thin ice. "Let's move in closer. Maybe we can find a way to get the rebels and loyalists to play nice." As they maneuvered through the junkyard that had once been the pride of the galaxy, it was hard not to feel a pang of regret. Rax had always imagined there'd be more ceremony involved in protecting something so pivotal. Instead, it felt like they were on the losing end of a clearance sale. "Deet, can you patch us into the archive systems? See if we can figure out how bad the damage is," Rax instructed. "I can try," Deet answered, already fiddling with wires and mumbling under his breath. The ship's tech could handle a surprising amount of abuse, but even Deet had his limits. "Don't hold your breath, though. This ship's about as reliable as a politician's promise." Meaning it's unlikely and probably going to explode in our faces, Midge asked with a raised eyebrow. Exactly, Deet replied, nodding sagely. The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying an internal map of the archive. It looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to a circuit board. Entire sections were red, warning lights blinking furiously. Looks like the rebels got pretty far in, Midge said, her voice tinged with concern. They've already managed to corrupt large swathes of data. If they hit the primary data banks, it's game over. How poetic, Rax grumbled. The universe's greatest library, turned into a digital bonfire by a bunch of zealots with a grudge. So what's the plan? Kor asked, finally looking up from his weapons station with a glare that could melt steel. Because I'm not really in the mood to become space debris today. The plan, Rax began, trying to sound confident, is to make sure the rebels don't finish the job. Midge, see if you can open a channel to their leader. Maybe we can convince them to stand down. While you're at it, maybe ask if they'll throw in a unicorn, Kor suggested, voice dripping with sarcasm. Hey, I'm full of miracles today, Rax said with a shrug. Midge tapped away at her console, hailing the rebel ship. Rebel forces, this is the Intrepid. We're here to talk. Preferably before anyone else dies. The response was swift and unsurprising. You have no authority here, a voice snapped back. The archive is already lost. Stand down or face destruction. Very persuasive, Rax said, leaning back with a sigh. Clearly, we're dealing with a group of reasonable individuals. They've likely been fed propaganda that makes us out to be the villains, Midge pointed out. Not much chance of reasoning with them unless we can prove otherwise. Then we need to find a way to show them what's really going on, Rax said, his mind racing. Deet, how's the signal strength on their comms? Think we could hijack it? With a bit of duct tape and luck, maybe, Deet replied, already rummaging through a toolbox that seemed to have everything but the kitchen sink. If we can broadcast the Loyalists' own transmissions, it might make them reconsider torching the place, Midge suggested. But it's a long shot. Long shots are our specialty, Rax said, more to himself than anyone else. As Deet worked his mechanical magic, Rax couldn't help but feel the weight of their task pressing down on him like an unwelcome guest. They were caught in the middle of a conflict that was so far above their pay grade it might as well be in another galaxy. Yet here they were, a ragtag crew trying to do right by a universe that had long since stopped making sense. Signals ready, Deet announced, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Give it a try, Captain. Rax nodded, opening a channel. Attention, rebel forces, you've been misled. We have evidence of the Loyalists' true intentions. Stand down and we can sort this out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the static cleared and voices began to spill out over the speakers, Loyalist leaders discussing the cleanup operation, their plans to preserve what remained of the archive. It was dry, dull, and exactly what they needed. Think they'll buy it? Kor asked, squinting at the holoscreen as if expecting it to answer. Either that or they'll decide to shoot us to the ends of the galaxy, Rax replied with a shrug. The tension on the bridge was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. But slowly, mercifully, the rebel ships began to pull back, their weapons powering down. It wasn't a victory, but it was something. Looks like they are retreating, Midge reported, sounding almost surprised. Guess even zealots can be reasonable sometimes, Rax said, exhaling slowly. Let's hope they stay that way. They set course for a safer part of the debris field, the danger momentarily behind them. Rax knew they'd have to keep their guard up. The Loyalists and rebels were both volatile, and peace was a fragile thing. Ever feel like we're just putting out fires while the universe chucks gasoline on us? Midge asked, leaning back in her chair. All the time, Rax replied with a tired smile. But at least we're still here to smell the smoke. For now, that would have to be enough. The Intrepid's bridge was a symphony of flashing lights and barely contained chaos, the usual atmosphere when things were about to go pear-shaped. Rax was doing his best to maintain the illusion of control, which was like trying to look regal while falling down the stairs. Set course for the nearest junk-free zone, Rax ordered, aiming for a tone that suggested he had a plan. It wasn't particularly convincing, but it was all he had. "Sure thing, Cap," Midge replied, her fingers dancing over the controls with the casual disregard of someone who had long since accepted their own mortality. "Just watch out for any surprise kamikaze moves from our fan club." "Right. Wouldn't want to ruin their day by splattering their hull with our debris," Rax muttered, glancing at the viewport. The debris field was more crowded than a discount liquor store on payday. Deet was still hunched over his console, chewing on the end of a pen with the dedication of a starving beaver. "Captain, I've got some interesting readings here. The archive's internal security system is still active, but it's been hacked. Someone's been feeding false data into the system." Rax frowned, the kind of frown that suggested he might be developing a new ulcer. Meaning someone's been having a bit too much fun with the controls," Deet replied, not looking up. "And I've got a funny feeling it's not the rebels. They're too busy playing whack-a-mole with the loyalists." "Fantastic," Rax said with all the enthusiasm of a man about to have a root canal. "Any idea who?" "Not yet," Deet admitted. "But whoever it is, they're good. And by good, I mean annoyingly competent." Rax rubbed his temples. "Great. Just what we need, a hacker with delusions of grandeur." Kor, who had been silently glaring at his weapon station like it had personally insulted him, broke his silence. "So, what do we do about it?" "First, we figure out who's playing games with our systems," Rax decided. "And then we make sure they stop." Midge snorted. "And here I thought the highlight of my day would be getting shot at by rebels." "Everyone needs a hobby," Rax said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As the Intrepid limped through the wreckage of what had once been a marvel of galactic architecture, Rax felt the weight of his responsibilities settling on his shoulders like a very persistent vulture. If there was someone on board working against them, it was only a matter of time before things went from bad to worse. The bridge door hissed open, and a figure slinked in with the kind of stealth that suggested they'd practiced sneaking around in more than a few dark alleys. It was Ren, an engineer with the kind of reputation that made most people double-check their wallets after a conversation. "Got a minute, Cap?" Ren's voice was a smooth blend of charm and deceit, like a used spaceship dealer with a particularly impressive resume. "Sure, Ren," Rax said, eyeing them suspiciously. "What's up?" Ren leaned against a console, exuding an air of nonchalance that was about as convincing as a 3-credit toupee. "Just thought you ought to know, I've seen someone skulking around the lower decks where they shouldn't be." "Is that so?" Rax replied, the suspicion growing in his gut like an unwelcome fungus. Ren nodded, their eyes twinkling with mischief. "Could be nothing. Could be something. But if someone's using the ship systems to play puppet master, I'd bet my last ration pack they are down there." Rax exchanged a glance with Midge, who shrugged as if to say, "Why not? We're already knee-deep in trouble." "All right," Rax decided, the words tasting like cheap whiskey. "Let's check it out. Midge, keep the bridge running. Kor, Deet, you're with me." As they made their way to the lower decks, Rax couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, like a man realizing he'd forgotten to wear pants to a meeting. If someone on board was betraying them, it meant their problems were just beginning. The corridors of the Intrepid were as familiar to Rax as the back of his hand, albeit slightly more likely to explode without warning. The ship had a personality, and that personality was a cross between a grumpy old man and a particularly stubborn mule. As they crept through the narrow passages, the clanking and groaning of the ship's ancient systems sounded like a chorus of mechanical complaints. They finally reached the lower decks, a place where the lights flickered with the enthusiasm of a dying flashlight, and the air smelled faintly of burnt toast. It was the kind of place that made you want to check over your shoulder twice and make sure you hadn't stumbled into a horror vid. "So, what's the plan, Cap?" Kor asked, keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of movement. "Find our saboteur and ask them politely to stop being a pain in the ass. If that doesn't work, we improvise," Rax replied, peering into the shadows. "Polite." That's us all over, Deet said with a dry chuckle, his pen now transformed into a makeshift chew toy. As they approached the section where Wren claimed to have seen activity, Rax felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. There was something off about the place, like it was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and he had a sneaking suspicion it was going to land right on his head. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with a locked door, the kind that suggested whatever lay behind it was either highly classified or incredibly embarrassing. Rax tapped the control panel, and to his surprise, the door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing a cramped room filled with monitors and cables. Sitting in front of the largest screen was a figure whose silhouette was all too familiar. Rax's heart sank faster than a lead balloon as he recognized the back of the chair. It was one of his own crew. "Well, well," Rax said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here?" The chair swiveled around to reveal a young woman with sharp features and a smirk that could cut glass. It was Tess, one of their technicians, wearing an expression that suggested she was enjoying this far too much. "Hello, Captain," Tess said, her tone as smooth as silk. "Fancy meeting you here." "Fancy indeed," Rax replied, crossing his arms. "Care to explain why you're playing puppet master with my ship?" Tess shrugged, an infuriatingly casual gesture. "Oh, you know, just keeping things interesting." "Interesting?" Core growled, his hand twitching toward his sidearm. "You call sabotaging our systems interesting?" "Relax, Core," Tess said, her smile never wavering. "It's nothing personal, just business." "Business?" Rax repeated, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "What kind of business?" "The kind that pays well," Tess replied, her eyes glinting with a cold, calculating light. "The rebels made me an offer I couldn't refuse." "You're working for the rebels," Deet exclaimed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. "Technically, I'm working for myself," Tess corrected, leaning back in her chair. "But yes, they have very deep pockets, and in case you haven't noticed, this ship could use all the help it can get." "Help?" Rax echoed, his patience fraying at the edges. "You're helping them destroy the archive." "Only partially," Tess said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, the archive's already a lost cause. I'm just making sure I come out the other side with something to show for it." Rax felt a headache coming on, the kind that promised to stick around for days. "And what about us, Tess? What happens to your crew, your friends?" Tess hesitated, her smirk faltering for the briefest of moments. "I was going to let you in on it. After all, there's no need for anyone to get hurt unnecessarily." "Unnecessarily?" Core spat, his voice like gravel. "You're playing both sides and you think you can walk away clean." Tess shrugged again, the gesture infuriatingly blasé. "The rebels promised safe passage. I was going to make sure you were all taken care of." Rax took a deep breath, trying to tamp down the urge to throttle her. It was like trying to put out a fire with a thimble of water. "Well, here's the thing, Tess. I don't take kindly to betrayal, so you're going to sit tight while we sort this mess out." Tess's smile returned, sharp and unyielding. "Do you really think you can stop them, Captain?" "Well," Rax said, stepping closer, "I've always been a fan of the underdog." He motioned for Core and Deet to restrain her, and Tess didn't resist. Her confidence in her inevitable escape was almost admirable, in a deeply infuriating way. With Tess secured, Rax turned back to the monitors, scanning the screens for any signs of activity. The rebels weren't going to wait for them to sort out their internal issues. They'd be coming, and soon. "What now, Cap?" Deet asked, his voice subdued. Rax glanced at the displays, his mind racing. "We need to get back to the bridge and prepare for the worst. And by the worst, I mean more surprises." They made their way back to the bridge with Tess in tow, her silence more damning than any words. As they arrived, the tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a blade. Midge looked up from her console, eyebrows raised. "So, we caught our rat." Rax nodded, gesturing to Tess. "Meet our saboteur. She's been feeding intel to the rebels." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" Midge said with a sardonic grin. "Got any more surprises for us, or is that the grand finale?" "Let's save the encore for later," Rax replied dryly. "Right now, we need to focus on not getting blown to bits." The monitors flickered as Midge worked her magic, trying to regain control over the ship's systems. The external sensors showed a flurry of activity, rebel ships closing in, their intent clear as day. "Looks like our friends are back," Midge reported, her tone grim. "And they're not here for tea and biscuits." "No rest for the wicked," Rax said, settling into his chair. "Let's make sure they get a warm welcome." As the rebels closed in, the ship shuddered under the strain of preparing for yet another battle. The Intrepid might have been held together by duct tape and hope, but that didn't mean it was going down without a fight. "Think we can hold them off, Cap?" Kor asked, his fingers twitching over the controls with a fervor that bordered on religious. "We'll have to," Rax replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Because if we don't, there won't be much left to salvage." The rebels' assault began in earnest, a barrage of laser fire and explosions that rattled the ship to its core. Rax could feel the vibrations through his bones, a staccato drumbeat of impending doom. "Shields holding," Deet reported, his voice strained but determined. "For now," Midge added, her fingers flying over the controls with a speed that suggested caffeine might be her primary fuel source. The ship bucked and groaned, metal shrieking in protest as it weathered the assault. Rax clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the viewport as if he could will the rebels away through sheer force of personality. "Keep firing," he ordered, his voice calm despite the storm raging around them. "Give them something to remember us by." As the battle raged on, Rax couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. The archive was crumbling, and with it, the fragile alliances that had held the galaxy together by the slimmest of threads. But for now, all they could do was fight, holding on to the hope that they might see another sunrise, even if it was just the artificial glow of a nearby star. It was a slim chance, but sometimes slim was all you got. After all, fighting against the odds was what humans did best. And if there was one thing Rax had learned in his time as captain, it was that the universe had a funny way of reminding you just how stubborn you could be. The bridge of the Intrepid shuddered, the sound of distant explosions echoing like a bad drum solo on a tin roof. Rax Tiberian, the reluctant conductor of this chaos, sat in the captain's chair with a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps sipping something strong on a less flammable vessel. "Why is it," he mused aloud, "that every time something explodes, it's always near something important?" "Just lucky, I guess," Midge replied, not bothering to look up from her holoscreen. Her fingers danced over the controls like a caffeinated spider, the screen lighting up with data she couldn't care less about but had to deal with anyway. Rax glanced at Tess, who was securely fastened to the chair across the room. She looked as smug as a cat in a canary store, despite the literal hell breaking loose outside. "How you enjoying the show, Tess?" "Seen better," she replied, her voice the verbal equivalent of a shrug. "But the company's entertaining." "You must have a very loose definition of entertainment," Deet chimed in, still chewing his pen like it owed him money. He was busy scanning the data flood, trying to keep pace with the rapidly deteriorating situation. "I've got an idea," Rax announced, more to himself than anyone else. He rubbed his chin, which had become a sort of stress toy in these situations. "Deet, recall any recent rebel tech they've been showing off." Deet's eyes flicked up momentarily, interest peaked. "You mean the stealth drive, the one they used to sneak past loyalist patrols and look smug about it?" "Exactly," Rax said. "If we can snatch one of those, we might be able to slip into the archive and save what's left." "Stealing from rebels?" Kor asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Why not just poke a bear while we're at it?" "Hey, I'd rather poke a bear than deal with another diplomatic meeting," Rax replied with a sardonic grin. "At least the bear's honest about wanting to eat you." Midge spun around in her chair, a gleam in her eye. "So we're gonna pull off a heist. How very daring, more like desperate," Rax corrected. "But desperate times, desperate measures and all that." "So how do we find this tech?" Deet asked, scanning the holoscreen for potential leads. Tess cleared her throat, gaining everyone's attention despite the bindings. I might know a guy, she offered, feigning innocence so poorly it deserved an award. I'm shocked, Rax deadpanned. Truly, you continue to defy all my low expectations. And here I thought you didn't trust me, Tess replied sweetly, like a snake offering you a ride through a swamp. We don't, Kor grunted, his hand never far from his sidearm. But we'll take what information you've got. Well, Tess began, leaning back comfortably despite the restraints. There's a small rebel outpost not too far from here. They've been stocking up on stealth drives. You'd have to be quick, though. They don't exactly roll out the red carpet. Quick's our middle name, Rax replied, standing up with newfound resolve. All right, crew, let's see if we've got any of that old intrepid luck left in us. As they set course for the rebel outpost, the tension on the bridge shifted. It wasn't quite optimism, more like a grudging acceptance that they might just pull this off, or blow up trying. Either way, it was better than waiting to be picked off like fish in a barrel. The journey was brief, the Intrepid's engines coughing to life like a heavy smoker trying to climb a flight of stairs. Soon enough, the outpost came into view, an unassuming cluster of buildings nestled in the shadow of a small moon, guarded by ships that looked more like flying junkyards than anything else. But junkyards packed a punch, and Rax knew better than to underestimate them. All right, folks, he said, gearing up for the inevitable storm. Midge, get us cloaked. Deet, find us an opening. Kor, keep those guns warm. Cap, Kor said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. They're always warm. That's what I like to hear, Rax replied. Tess, any last-minute betrayals we should know about? Not at the moment, she replied, her tone almost bored. But I'll let you know. As they glided closer, the Intrepid shimmied into stealth mode, a patchwork miracle of old tech and newer desperation. It was like hiding a rhinoceros behind a curtain, but it worked well enough to get them close without raising alarms. Got a gap in their patrol, Deet announced, finger pointing at the screen. It's narrow, tighter than a tax collector's handshake, but doable. I love narrow, Rax said, eyes fixed on the viewport. Narrow's just another word for possibility. The plan, if it could be called that, was simple enough. Slip in, grab a stealth drive, slip out before anyone realized they'd been robbed blind. But plans, like ships, often fell apart the moment reality got involved. We're in, Midge said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. Let's make this quick. As they neared the warehouse housing the stealth drives, the ship lurched, a sudden rumble of distant laser fire shaking the hull. The outpost wasn't as asleep as they'd hoped, and Rax cursed under his breath. Guess they are not keen on sharing, Deet commented, his voice tinged with nervous humor. Can't imagine why, Rax replied, bracing himself as the ship bucked again. Kor, give him a distraction. With pleasure, Kor said, and the Intrepid's guns roared to life, delivering a series of calculated blasts that lit up the enemy's sensors like a malfunctioning light show. Now or never, Midge added, pushing the ship forward with a deft touch. The warehouse loomed, a dark silhouette against the chaotic sky, and Rax felt a flicker of hope. Inside, the stealth drives were stored like precious gems, waiting to be plucked by the bravest or most foolish of thieves. Deet, you're on extraction. Kor, cover him. Midge, keep this bucket stable, Rax ordered, all business now as the adrenaline kicked in. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, slipping into the warehouse like shadows among shadows. Deet and Kor worked in tandem, the former slicing security systems while the latter kept watch, his gun ready to bark at the first sign of trouble. Stealth drive acquired, Deet announced, sounding more surprised than triumphant. Guess luck is on our side tonight. Don't jinx us, Kor warned, eyes scanning the darkness. Get it back to the ship. As they made their way back, alarms began to wail, a cacophony of shrill warnings that meant they'd overstayed their unwelcome. Rax gritted his teeth, urging them to move faster. Time to go, he said, already turning the Intrepid around. Bring home the bacon, boys. Deet and Kor barely made it back aboard before the outpost's defenses roared to life, a deadly dance of fire and metal that threatened to turn them into space debris. But the Intrepid had faced worse. and with Midge at the helm, they made their escape, the stolen stealth drive secured like a prize at a particularly dangerous carnival. "Well, that was fun," Tess remarked as they sped away, her expression one of genuine amusement. "You do know how to show a girl a good time." "Save the compliments," Rax replied, his attention focused on the rapidly disappearing outpost. "We're not out of the woods yet." As they zoomed away from impending doom, Rax couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. They'd done the impossible, or at least the highly improbable, and lived to tell the tale. For now, that was enough. "Okay, folks," Rax said, exhaling a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Let's see what this piece of rebel tech can do. If it can get us through the archive without ending up as scrap metal, maybe we'll have a chance at stopping this mess." "Here's to hoping," Midge replied, her tone lighter, as if the weight of doom had eased just a smidge. Rax grinned, a wry smile that was more grim than joyful, but a smile nonetheless. "Who knows? Maybe we'll even get a medal out of this. Or a bill for damages," Deet added, ever the realist. "Wouldn't be the first time," Rax said, settling back into his chair as they plotted a course for the archive. With the stealth drive humming like a contented cat, they slipped through space, a silent specter on a collision course with destiny. The archive awaited, a burning monument to knowledge and chaos, and they were heading straight for the heart of it. Rax knew the odds were stacked higher than a politician's promises, but that was life on the Intrepid, a constant gamble where the stakes were always life or death. And if they were going to face the end, they'd do it with style, stubbornness, and maybe, just maybe, a fighting chance. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against all odds. After all, someone had to pick up the pieces when the universe decided to fall apart. And who better than the crew of the Intrepid, the most stubborn bunch of misfits to ever dodge disaster in the galaxy? The Intrepid drifted toward the Universal Archive like a mouse into a trap, its engines purring thanks to their freshly acquired Rebel stealth drive. The space around them was a graveyard of dead ships, a warning for anyone diving headfirst into the mess. Rax scratched his head, wondering if his brain had finally taken a permanent leave of absence. He must have been mad pulling a stunt like this. "Captain, I'm picking up rebel chatter," Midge reported, eyes glued to her holoscreen. "They're onto us." "Bloody hell," Rax muttered. "We've barely had time to warm up the stealth drive, and they're already sending the welcome committee." "Maybe they're just eager to make new friends," Tess said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's not every day they get to meet a crew with our moral flexibility." Midge snorted, the rarest of laughs from her. "I wouldn't call stealing their tech a friendship bracelet." "Oh, come on," Tess shot back with a grin. "It's the thought that counts." "Enough social commentary," Rax interrupted. "Let's focus on not getting ourselves spaced, shall we?" The crew muttered their agreements, though none of them sounded convinced. The air on the bridge was thick with an unspoken dread, the kind that made you want to laugh just so you wouldn't scream. As they hovered near the archive, the enormity of their situation hit like a sucker punch. The rebels weren't just any enemy, they were relentless, a swarm of hornets ready to sting anything in their path. And right now, the Intrepid was the biggest, juiciest target in the sector. "Deet, give me some good news for once," Rax said, turning to the data-hungry crew member. "Well," Deet started, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "The good news is the stealth drive's holding up. Bad news, there's a whole fleet out there that might disagree with our exit strategy." "Great, so we're stealthy but stuck," Rax said, rubbing his temples. "Anyone else feel like we're the universe's least favorite comedy act?" "Hey, at least we didn't explode on the way here," Kor replied, his tone the verbal equivalent of a shrug. "That's something." "Silver linings, Kor, silver linings," Rax said dryly. "Okay, everyone, we need a plan. Ideas." A heavy silence hung in the air as if the universe itself had paused to watch the crew flounder. "We could try diplomacy," Tess suggested, though her tone made it clear she was joking. "I hear rebels are suckers for a good peace treaty," Rax sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I think they've got a better chance of hugging a black hole." The crew chuckled, albeit nervously. Laughter was their lifeline, the one thing keeping them from spiraling into despair. They were cornered, no doubt about it, but they weren't dead yet. Not if Rax had anything to say about it. "All right, let's try something a little less suicidal," Rax said, rallying his crew. "Deet, what about hacking into their comms? Can we feed them some bad intel? Something to make them chase their own tails for a bit." Deet rubbed his chin, contemplating. "It's risky, but it might work. If they think we're somewhere else, it could buy us time." "And what if it doesn't?" Kor asked, ever the pragmatist. "Then we die in a blaze of glory," Tess said, giving Kor a wink. "At least it'll be exciting." "Exciting's one word for it," Midge muttered, typing furiously on her holoscreen. "Deet, get on it," Rax ordered. "Midge, keep monitoring rebel communications. I want to know the moment they start scrambling." With a nod, Deet got to work, fingers dancing over his console like a pianist at a recital. The rest of the crew settled into an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional beep of equipment and the distant hum of the Intrepid's engines. "Rax," Midge said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "They're moving in and fast." "Damn it," Rax swore. "Deet, how's that hack coming?" "Almost there," Deet replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Just a bit more." Rax watched as the proximity alarms flared, red lights casting a hellish glow across the bridge. The rebels were close, too close. Rax's heart thundered in his chest, every instinct screaming to run, even though there was nowhere to run to. "Anytime now, Deet," Rax urged, trying to ignore the cold sweat trickling down his back. "Got it," Deet exclaimed, sitting back with a triumphant grin. "They're getting false readings now." "Good," Rax said, his voice a little steadier. "Let's hope it's enough." As they watched the rebel ships veer off course, Rax felt a flicker of hope. False hope, maybe, but hope nonetheless. It was a slim chance, a threadbare shield against the storm, but it was better than nothing. "Looks like they bought it," Midge announced, her relief palpable. "They're heading in the wrong direction." "For now," Tess reminded them, her smile a little too knowing. "The universe loves its little jokes." Rax nodded, knowing she was right. The rebels might have been fooled for the moment, but it wouldn't last. They needed a more permanent solution, and fast. "All right, crew, let's not waste this chance," Rax said, taking command. "We need to get into the archive and find something we can use against them, something big." "Like what?" Kor asked, skepticism etched onto his features. "A magic button that makes them disappear. Something like that," Rax replied, his expression hardening. "There's got to be something in there. The archive's got knowledge on everything, doesn't it?" "Supposedly," Deet said, shrugging. "But most of it's encrypted or guarded by things that would make our problems look like a picnic." "Then we'll pack a lunch," Rax said, determination creeping into his voice. "We've come this far, we're not turning back now." "You're the boss," Midge said with a smirk, though her voice carried a note of admiration. "Lead the way, Captain." The crew rallied, their spirits lifted by the sheer audacity of their plan. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble in a game where the stakes were the highest they'd ever faced. But it was also their only chance. And the crew of the Intrepid, for all their faults and flaws, knew how to seize a chance when it came knocking. As they approached the archive, the enormity of their task loomed over them like a storm cloud. The knowledge contained within those walls could change the fate of the galaxy, or doom it. Rax felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than any asteroid. "All right, people," he said, his voice carrying across the bridge like a clarion call. "Let's show the universe what we're made of. We're not just surviving today, we're making history." "Or becoming it," Tess quipped, though her smile was genuine. With the stealth drive still masking their presence, the Intrepid slipped into the archive, its halls echoing with the ghosts of battles past. The crew moved with purpose, their steps a drumbeat of defiance against the odds stacked against them. Rax led them through the labyrinthine corridors, each more foreboding than the last. But he didn't waver. If there was one thing he'd learned, it was that the universe didn't hand you victories. You had to wrestle them from its hands, kicking and screaming. "Keep your eyes peeled," Rax instructed, his voice low but steady. "We're looking for anything that can give us an edge." They spread out, searching for clues, hints, anything that could turn the tide in their favor. But the archive was a vast, unyielding enigma, its secrets buried beneath layers of protocols and barriers. "Gotta say, I'm feeling nostalgic," Dietz said, tapping away at another console. "This place has a real end-of-the-world vibe." "Yeah, reminds me of my last family reunion," Core added with a grim chuckle. "Focus, people," Rax said, though he couldn't help but smile at their banter. They were staring into the abyss, and yet they joked as if they were at a party. It was why he loved them, why he trusted them with his life. "I've got something," Midge called out, excitement threading through her usual calm demeanor. "Looks like schematics for some kind of weapon." "A weapon?" Rax asked, moving to her side. "What kind?" "Hard to say," she replied, her fingers dancing over the interface. "But it's definitely something big, could be the leverage we need." "Perfect," Rax said, feeling a surge of hope. "Download it but before he could finish, the lights flickered, alarms blaring to life. The rebels, having finally realized they'd been duped, were on their tail again. "Time's up," Tess said, her voice half laughing, half serious. "Looks like our luck just ran out." "Not yet," Rax replied, his determination unwavering. "Midge, get those schematics. Deet, prepare for a quick exit. Core, Tess, get ready for a firefight." The crew snapped into action, their movements synchronized by necessity, driven by the knowledge that this might very well be their last stand. The rebels were closing in, their ships converging on the archive like vultures on a carcass. As the Intrepid roared back to life, the crew braced themselves for the coming storm. But they were ready to fight, ready to die, if that's what it took. They stood united, a ragtag band of misfits with more grit than sense, and they were going to give the universe one hell of a show. "Let's make them work for it," Rax said, his voice a battle cry. "For the Intrepid! For the Intrepid!" The crew echoed, their voices rising as one. And as the first shots rang out, cutting through the void with brutal finality, Rax knew they were fighting not just for survival, but for the chance to be remembered. Because in the end, that's all anyone could ask for, a chance to leave their mark, to defy the universe one last time. Rax Tiberian watched the Intrepid's monitors as rebel ships closed in, their blips on the screen like hungry sharks circling a lone swimmer with cramping legs. On a good day, the universe gave you gravity, and that was about it. Today, well, it seemed determined to bury them under an avalanche of bad luck and worse decisions. But Rax wasn't about to let the universe have the last laugh. "Midge, tell me you've got those schematics," he barked, scanning the bridge for any signs of a miracle. "I've got them," Midge replied, her fingers still dancing over the holoscreen. "But don't ask me to turn them into anything useful." "I'm not a miracle worker." "Never thought you were," Rax said with a wry smile, "but desperation's a hell of a motivator." Core, standing at the ready with his usual skeptical frown, chimed in. "And what are we supposed to do with some ancient blueprints? Build a doomsday weapon out of duct tape and wishful thinking?" "Could work," Tess interjected with a smirk. "I bet the rebels wouldn't see that coming." "Yeah, they'd die laughing," Deet added, not looking up from his console as he worked to keep the rebels at bay electronically. "But hey, there are worse ways to go." "Death by humor," Rax mused. "Better than what we're facing if we don't find some way out of this mess." He shifted his focus back to Midge, who was furiously decrypting the data. "Any idea what this weapon is?" "Best guess. It's some kind of energy disruptor," Midge answered. "The schematics mention something about dimensional rifts and quantum destabilization, just your everyday apocalyptic tech." Rax's eyebrows shot up. "Sounds like just the thing to ruin everyone's day. Can we use it?" "Not unless you've got a portable universe in your back pocket," Midge said, shaking her head. "It's going to take a lot more power than we've got." "Great," Core mumbled. "Another useless piece of cosmic junk." "Not completely useless," Rax said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Remember, we're not just looking for a weapon, we're looking for leverage." Tess chuckled. "You mean like when you're about to lose a card game, so you flip the table and run for the door?" "Exactly," Rax replied, his eyes gleaming with a mix of desperation and determination. "If we can convince the rebels that we can use this thing, We might be able to scare them off or at least buy some breathing room. Deet snorted. You think they'll just believe us because we say so? They're rebels, not idiots. True, Rax admitted. But in the heat of the moment, a little bluff can go a long way. The crew mulled over the idea. It was a gamble, sure, but when the universe dealt you a bad hand, you either folded or went all in. And folding wasn't in Rax's nature. All right, Rax said, clapping his hands to rally his crew. Let's dress this thing up and make it look like the galaxy's worst nightmare. They set to work, cobbling together a convincing facade out of spare parts, old hull plating, and a healthy dose of theatrics. If the rebels got close enough to see through their ruse, they'd be toast. But with any luck, and they certainly needed some of that, the rebels would stay just far enough away to buy the bluff. Rax, Midge said, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement that only came with insanity. I've managed to tweak our comms. We can broadcast a fake energy signature, make it look like we're charging the weapon. Good, Rax said, feeling a sliver of hope creep into his voice. Make it look real. I want them shaking in their boots. Or whatever rebels wear, Tess chimed in. Probably socks with sandals, knowing their fashion sense. With their hastily assembled plan in motion, the crew of the Intrepid braced for the inevitable showdown. On the monitors, the rebel ships continued their relentless approach, like iron filings to a particularly magnetic disaster. All right, Intrepid crew, Rax said, his voice carrying a mix of gravity and wry amusement. This is it. Our last best chance to not become cosmic roadkill. Tess gave him a mock salute. Here's to going out with style, or at least going out with a bang, Core added dryly. Either way, it beats a desk job on Earth, Midge said, her tone more serious now. With a nod, Rax turned his attention back to the unfolding chaos on the monitors. He could practically hear the ticking clock counting down to their potential annihilation, but there was no turning back now. Deet, broadcast the signal, Rax ordered, his heart hammering in his chest like a caged animal. Let's see if we can bluff our way out of this. Deet patched into the comms, setting the fake energy signature loose like a wolf in a flock of sheep. Broadcasting now, Captain. Let's see how they like our little party trick. For a moment, nothing happened. The tension on the bridge was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity as they waited for the rebels to take the bait. Then, slowly, like a miracle conjured from the depths of space itself, the rebel ships began to hesitate, their formations breaking apart as they reconsidered their approach. They're buying it, Midge said, her voice filled with disbelief and relief in equal measure. They're actually buying it. Seems like they don't fancy a dance with death after all, Tess said with a grin. Smart choice, Rax murmured, though he barely dared to breathe. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. Keep those comms open, Deet, Rax instructed, his mind racing with possibilities. Let's see if we can spook them into giving us a wider berth. The crew watched, nerves frayed but spirits buoyed. As the rebels continued to pull back, it seemed as though, against all odds, their bluff was working. The universe might have been laughing, but for now, the joke was on someone else. Here they come, Core warned, pointing at the monitors where a few stubborn ships refused to be cowed by the bluff. Looks like we've got some true believers. Let them come, Rax said, a grim smile playing on his lips. We'll give them a front row seat. As the rebel ships edged closer, the Intrepid's crew prepared to put on a show. They'd survived this long by outsmarting, outmaneuvering, and outlasting their enemies. Now they'd do it again. Midge, start broadcasting some scientific nonsense about the weapon, Rax said, thinking on his feet. Let's make them think they're up against something truly terrifying. On it, Midge replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she fabricated a stream of techno-babble that sounded both plausible and horrifying. The rebel ships hesitated, caught between curiosity and caution. It was a dance of cosmic proportions, and the Intrepid crew was leading. Keep it up, Midge, Rax encouraged, his voice laced with anticipation. Let's make them regret ever messing with us. The tension mounted, electrifying the air as both sides played their hands. The rebels, sniffing a trap, began to fall back, their confidence shaken by the specter of the unknown weapon. "It's working," Deet said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're backing off." Rax allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. "All right, people, let's capitalize on this. We've got to make our escape before they change their minds." As the Intrepid's engines roared to life, the ship lurched forward, cutting through the void with renewed purpose. They had a window, small but significant, through which to escape the rebels' grasp. "Keep our profile low," Rax ordered. "We need to stay under the radar until we're clear." The crew sprang into action, each member playing their part in the delicate dance of survival. With their makeshift weapon still broadcasting its faux energy signature, they maneuvered through the chaos, dodging rebel ships and weaving between the wreckage of past battles. "We're almost clear," Kor announced, his eyes glued to the monitors. "Just a little further." "Let's not count our chickens before they hatch," Tess said, her tone equal parts sarcasm and hope. As they breached the outer perimeter of the Archive's graveyard, the rebel presence began to thin, leaving the Intrepid with a slim but tangible shot at freedom. "Deet, cut the broadcast," Rax said, his voice a mix of relief and caution. "We don't want to draw attention now that we're making our exit." Deet nodded, shutting down the fake energy signature with a few keystrokes. With their bluff called off, the Intrepid slipped into the shadows, a ghost among the stars. Rax exhaled, the weight of the situation still pressing down on him. "Good work, everyone. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least we've got a fighting chance." "Yeah, 1 in a million," Kor grumbled, though his expression was more relieved than cynical. "Which is a lot better than 0, Tess pointed out, her voice light but steady. "Rax," Midge called, drawing his attention back to her console. "I've managed to decrypt more of those schematics. There's something else, something big." "What is it?" Rax asked, his curiosity piqued despite the exhaustion tugging at his mind. "It's hard to say," Midge replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But it looks like this thing isn't just a weapon. It's a key to something monumental." Rax leaned in, his interest piqued. "Explain." Midge tapped a few keys, bringing up a complex diagram on the holoscreen. "It's like a map to an ancient facility, hidden somewhere in the galaxy. And if the data's correct, it holds the power to change everything." Silence reigned on the bridge, each crew member processing the implications of this revelation. It was a turning point, a potential solution to their seemingly insurmountable problem. "Could be our ticket out," Tess said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "Or a new set of problems," Kor countered, ever the realist. Rax nodded, acknowledging the gravity of their discovery. "Either way, it's something, and that's more than we had before." "What's the plan, Captain?" Deet asked, his expression a mix of hope and trepidation. Rax considered their options, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. They could use this newfound knowledge as leverage, a bargaining chip in their precarious game of survival. Or they could risk it all, take a leap of faith into the unknown, and see if the universe had a sense of humor after all. "We make a decision," Rax said finally, his voice resolute. "Either we use this key to bargain our way out, or we go all in and see where it takes us." The crew exchanged glances, each member weighing the risks and rewards of their next move. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was the potential payoff. It was a gamble, sure, but what choice did they have? "Let's go all in," Tess said, her eyes alight with determination. "We've come this far." "Agreed," Kor said, surprising even himself with his readiness to risk it all. Rax looked at each of his crew members, seeing their resolve mirrored in his own eyes. "All right, we're going for it. Buckle up, folks. We're about to make history or become it." As the Intrepid set its course for the unknown, Rax felt a thrill of anticipation pulse through him. They were on the brink of something monumental, a discovery that could alter the galaxy's fate. And for once, the universe didn't seem to be laughing at them. Not yet, at least. With the stars stretching out before them, the crew of the Intrepid prepared to face whatever lay ahead. They were a ragtag band of misfits, but they were also fearless, indomitable, and ready to defy the cosmos one last time. The Intrepid drifted through space like a drunk trying to find his way home from the pub. Not exactly the smoothest ride in the galaxy, but it beat the alternative of getting vaporized by rebel ships. Rax Tiberian, the man of the Ior, or the moment at least, sat in the captain's chair, chewing over the precariousness of their situation like a piece of gristle he couldn't quite swallow. So Tess said, breaking the tense silence with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, "What's the plan, Rax? Besides praying to every deity in the cosmos that we don't end up as floating debris." Rax scratched his chin, feeling the stubble remind him of just how long he'd been awake. "Well, Tess, I was thinking we'd use Midge's new toy here to negotiate our way out of this mess. Maybe scare both sides into behaving like civilized lunatics. Nothing says diplomacy like a threat of total annihilation," Deet quipped, clicking away at his console like the fate of the universe depended on his typing speed. "A classic move," Core chimed in, arms crossed and leaning back as though he had a ringside seat to the galaxy's dumbest boxing match. "But doesn't that make us, the bad guys? Do we look like the good guys?" Tess shot back. "We're barely the alive guys. Glad to know our moral compasses are as flexible as ever," Rax said, more amused than concerned. "Midge, how's the map looking?" Midge, hunched over her holoscreen like a kid cramming for finals, waved a hand dismissively. "It's not exactly Google Maps, but I've got enough to make some educated guesses. There's definitely something big at the end of this breadcrumb trail, big enough to make both the rebels and the loyalists sit up and take notice." Rax asked. "If they are not idiots, yeah," Midge replied, not bothering to look up. "But I wouldn't underestimate their capacity for stupidity." "Never do," Rax agreed, shifting his gaze to the looming shape of the rebel fleet on the monitor. "All right then. Let's get the ball rolling." He leaned forward, fingers dancing across the comms console with the grace of a cow on roller skates. "Attention all ships in the vicinity. This is Commander Rax Tiberian of the Intrepid. We've got something you're gonna want to hear." There was a crackle of static, then the guttural growl of a rebel commander filled the bridge. "Why should we listen to a dead man talking?" Rax grinned, all teeth and no warmth. "Because this dead man's got the key to the kingdom. Or in this case, the key to an ancient facility with enough firepower to make your little war look like a toddler's tantrum." Silence hung heavy, the kind that made you want to check under the bed for monsters. Then a new voice cut in, this one smoother, more polished. "Loyalist, undoubtedly. And why should we believe you, Commander Tiberian? Your reputation isn't exactly sterling." "Because I'm the one holding the cards," Rax said, letting the tension build like a pressure cooker. "And because I'm the only one with the location of this facility. You want a chance at grabbing this power for yourselves, you'll call a ceasefire and listen." "Sounds like a bluff," the rebel commander sneered, attempting to call Rax's hand. "Could be," Rax admitted, shrugging in a way that was more for show than substance. "But then, are you really willing to gamble on that? One wrong move and you could be starting a new life as space dust." "If you're lying," the loyalist began, but Rax cut him off. "Then you're no worse off than you are now. You get trigger happy though, and I promise you'll be regretting it before your atoms even have time to say goodbye to each other." "Makes a compelling argument," Tess whispered to Core, who nodded appreciatively. "All right, Commander," the loyalist voice said, a grudging respect seeping into his tone. "What are your terms?" "Simple," Rax said, leaning back with the air of a man who just played a winning hand in poker. "We meet at neutral coordinates. No weapons, no tricks. We talk and then we decide how we're going to play this. You get what you want, we get to live another day. Everyone wins." "Convenient for you," the rebel said, his reluctance like sigh or whine lingering in the air. "Convenience has nothing to do with it," Rax retorted. "Survival, on the other hand." Static crackled again, followed by a reluctant assent. "Fine. We'll play your game, but no tricks." "No tricks," Rax echoed with a grin that said the opposite. "Just the chance to save your own skins." The comms went dead, leaving the bridge in a tense silence. Tess let out a low whistle. "And here I thought we were going to have to shoot our way out." Still might, Core said, casting a wary glance at the monitors. But at least now we'll get to see their faces while we do it. Anyone want to bet on how long before someone pulls a fast one? Deet asked, not even looking up from his console. Betting against stupidity is a fool's game, Midge said, finally tearing her eyes from the holoscreen. But at least we've got a shot. Rax stood, stretching his back until it audibly protested. All right, folks. Let's prep for our little rendezvous. Everyone know their roles. There was a collective murmur of assent, each crew member mentally girding themselves for the task ahead. Rax felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, the kind that either precedes a triumph or a total disaster. Funny how similar those two could feel. With a nod, he set the ship's course for the coordinates they'd broadcasted, his mind already racing through contingency plans. They were walking a razor's edge, but at least it was their edge. And for now, that would have to be enough. As the Intrepid drifted towards its rendezvous, Rax couldn't help but think about how much simpler life could have been back on Earth. Filing paperwork, measuring coffee breaks, mundane but safe. Yet here he was, playing puppet master in a cosmic drama that could end in destruction or deliverance. Rax, Midge's voice broke through his thoughts. We've got incoming signals. Looks like both sides are showing up as requested. Let's hope they remembered to bring their listening ears, Tess quipped, her fingers dancing over her console as she prepared for whatever chaos might erupt. They better, Rax replied dryly. I'm fresh out of patience and heroics. The Intrepid settled into its designated position in the black void, the rebel and loyalist ships taking up cautious stations on either side. A stalemate in space, each side wary of blinking first. Opening channels, Deet reported, his voice steady despite the tension that hummed through the bridge like a live wire. Rax took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of bravado and recklessness he possessed. Welcome, folks. Glad you could make it. Let's get down to business, shall we? Fine words for a man surrounded by two hostile fleets, the rebel commander's voice echoed, dripping with skepticism. Hostility is such a strong word, Rax replied, waving a hand dismissively. I prefer potentially dangerous acquaintances. Enough games, Tiberian, the loyalist cut in. What assurance do we have that your information is legitimate, besides my winning personality? Rax asked, earning a snort from Tess. You've got my word. And if that's not enough, you'll just have to trust that I like my atoms exactly where they are. Words are cheap, the rebel interjected. We need proof. Fair enough, Rax conceded. Midge, give them a taste. Midge tapped a few keys, sending a snippet of the decrypted schematics to both fleets. It was just enough to whet their appetites without giving away the whole meal. There was a pause, the kind that stretched nerves to the breaking point. Then the loyalist spoke, his tone grudging. This is significant. No kidding, Rax said, trying to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. Now are we ready to play nice, or do we need to keep posturing until someone loses their cool? State your terms, the rebel commanded, though there was a note of curiosity creeping into his voice. Simple, Rax said, feeling as if he was on the precipice of either victory or catastrophe. We work together to unlock this facility's secrets. Split the spoils, avoid mutual destruction. Everyone goes home with something to show for it, and if we refuse, the loyalist asked, the challenge clear, then we all get to find out just how destructive these secrets can be, Rax replied, letting the threat hang like a guillotine. And nobody wins, not even me. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Finally, the loyalist broke it, his tone resigned. You leave us with little choice, Commander. We accept your terms for now. The rebels concur, came the reluctant reply. For now. Rax let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Good. Let's get to work then. As the Allied ships began the delicate dance of cooperation, each wary of the other's intentions but spurred on by the promise of shared power, Rax allowed himself a small smile. They'd pulled it off for now. But as always, the devil was in the details, and the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Think they'll play nice? Tess asked, sidling up beside him, her eyes on the screen. Like cats and dogs in a thunderstorm, Rax replied, not entirely joking. But we've got a seat at the table, and for now, that's better than nothing. Here's to making history, Deet said, raising an imaginary glass, his voice laced with sarcasm. Or becoming it, Core added, ever the realist. Rax nodded, looking out at the stars with a mix of hope and cynicism. It was a new dawn in a galaxy that thrived on chaos. All they could do was ride the wave and hope they didn't drown in the process. With the crew of the Intrepid poised on the edge of the unknown, Rax realized one thing. In the grand scheme of things, they were just as small as the rest of the universe's pawns. But for once they were holding the dice, and maybe, just maybe, they could roll them in their favor. Rax leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in a way that reminded him of old bones. Well, folks, I think we can officially say we survived the universe's latest attempt to make us extinct. Midge snorted, eyes still glued to her holoscreen. Yeah, surviving another day in this cosmic dumpster fire we call life. What a time to be alive. Tess glanced over, raising an eyebrow. And here I thought you loved the thrill of almost dying at least twice a week. Almost dying is just living with a little more awareness, Midge replied, throwing a wink in Tess's direction. Keeps the senses sharp. Sharp as a bowling ball, Core muttered, casting a skeptical glance at the empty expanse outside the viewport. At least we're done playing the space piñata with rebel and loyalist sticks, Deet said, his fingers still dancing a familiar rhythm on the console. I was getting tired of being the universe's favorite punching bag. And yet, here we are, Rax said, leaning forward, his grin wolfish and a little wicked, with both sides leaving us alone for once. Imagine that humanity, those insignificant apes from Earth making a galactic impact. Probably just shocked we haven't blown ourselves up yet, Core observed, his tone flat as the moons of Lorthon. A lovely place if you liked barren wastelands and breathable air on Thursdays. Glass half full, half empty, or smashed on the floor. It's all perspective, Rax said, shrugging. But at least we proved that a little human ingenuity goes a long way. Ingenuity, or your particular brand of insane bluffing? Tess asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Rax held up a finger. Ah, but who can tell the difference in this universe? I mean, we managed to get two warring factions to play nice for half a second. That's gotta be worth something. Yeah, Midge said, tapping her holoscreen. Until they realize they don't need us anymore, and then we're back to being space debris. Always the optimist, aren't you, Midge? Core said, shaking his head. But she's probably right. The galaxy's a harsh place, and gratitude's as rare as a loyalist admiral who doesn't have a stick up his backside. Speaking of which, Deet chimed in, we should probably clear out of here before they change their minds. Our welcome's only good until they realize we're still alive. Good point, Rax said, standing up with the air of a man who dodged a bullet, only to find himself staring down the barrel of another. Let's plot a course to somewhere a little less explosive. Back to Earth, Tess asked, her tone hopeful but laced with the knowledge that their captain was as predictable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Rax made a face. And go back to filing reports and sipping lukewarm coffee. Tempting, but I think I'll pass. Besides, Earth can only handle one Tiberian at a time. They're still recovering from my last visit. True, Midge said with a mock-serious nod. They still tell stories about the great coffee flood of '98. Rax laughed, the sound a rare burst of genuine humor in the midst of the chaos. All right, crew. Let's get out of this mess and find ourselves a quiet corner of the galaxy. The Intrepid's engines hummed to life, a sound that was as reassuring as it was likely to fail at any moment. But for now, it was enough. As they began their journey into the unknown once more, a strange sense of camaraderie settled over the crew. Hey, anyone got any ideas on how we're gonna spend our newfound peace? Tess asked, her tone casual. Peace, Core snorted. In this galaxy, I'll believe it when I see it, but if it happens to drop by, I suppose I'll take up knitting. Knitting bombs, maybe, Deet said, the corner of his mouth quirking up in a rare display of humor. At least we showed them we're not to be underestimated, Midge said, her eyes on the stars. You know, for a species that still uses fire to cook its food. Yeah, Rax said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. Turns out, sometimes the underdogs get to bite back. As the stars streaked by, the crew settled into an easy quiet, the weight of survival lifting just a little. They'd faced down the galaxy's worst and somehow come out the other side, not unscathed but intact, and maybe that was enough. So, Tess said, breaking the silence with a wry grin, who's up for a game of cards? Loser does the next engine maintenance. As if you'd actually win, Core retorted, reaching for the deck. Hey, stranger things have happened, Tess shot back, shuffling the cards with a flourish. The game began, the familiar banter and friendly insults filling the bridge as the Intrepid sailed on through space. They'd won a moment of respite, a brief pause in the relentless pressure of existence. Rax watched his crew, his family really, and felt a rare sense of satisfaction. They were an unlikely group, tossed together by fate or insanity or both, but they worked. They survived. And maybe they'd get a chance to do more than just that. Maybe they'd find a way to thrive, to carve out a little piece of the galaxy for themselves. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Deet, Rax said, pulling his attention away from the game. Set course for somewhere with decent food and terrible company. I feel like being disappointed tonight. Aye, Captain, Deet replied, his fingers already flying over the console. Anywhere in mind or just the usual dive? Surprise me, Rax said, leaning back with a contented sigh. After all, surprises seem to be the theme of the day. The Intrepid sailed on, a tiny speck in the vastness of space, but in that moment they were more than just survivors. They were human, and that in itself was something worth fighting for. Here's to tomorrow, Rax said, raising an imaginary glass as the ship hummed around them. May it not suck, Tess replied, raising her own invisible toast. And for a moment, in the midst of the vast, chaotic universe, the crew of the Intrepid found a little bit of peace. It wouldn't last, nothing ever did, but for now it was enough. Enough to keep them going, enough to face whatever came next. As they sailed into the unknown, Rax allowed himself a small, private smile. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to finding out.